Welcome back to the parillaworks channel. My name is John. Back in November, I thought it would be fun to knock out a quick project while working on some other stuff. The idea was a squiggle-shaped wine rack that would act as a table centerpiece and decoration. I used a fairly similar method that was used on my squiggle bench I made a few years ago. The ash I'm using was salvaged from the mantle I was working on at the time. It's 8/4 stock and was supposed to yield 2 squiggle racks. After getting the pieces cut to rough dimensions, I cut out a template on the CNC router. The length is about 24 inches, height about 2 inches, and thickness of the actual squiggle is about 5/8 of an inch. The holes were intended to be for alignment purposes, but they ended up being unnecessary. After getting the tabs cleaned up, I traced the template on my rough stock. From there, I could drill out the alignment holes and cut off the excess material at the bandsaw. The alignment holes were supposed to serve a few purposes. First, they would help attach the template to the workpiece, allowing me to use less double-sided tape. Second, they were supposed to prevent the template from bending or deforming while routing. And third, they were supposed to make gluing subsequent pieces much easier. In actuality, they didn't help much. It turns out it's very important for alignment holes to be aligned themselves. Anyway, I went to route my first piece using a makeshift router table and large flush trim bit. I installed a little starter pin to provide leverage, but I still couldn't get the piece to take without the bit taking huge bites. I took this as a sign to stop and put this project on hold for a few months. I came to the conclusion that the pieces were too tall relative to their thickness. I wasn't able to provide enough support for the bit to eat away at almost 2 inches of material. My solution was to cut the pieces in half. This would mean more glue-ups, but I figured it would be safer and yield cleaner results. I also finally got myself a little router table. The full-size router tables that I would like to have are in the neighborhood of $800 to $1,200. I couldn't justify that right now, so I opted for this little guy from Lee Valley. It can accommodate a few different trim routers and clamps nicely to the bench. It'll be great for routing grooves and small box parts, and it worked pretty well for this project too. Once again, I started by routing my first piece using the template. When I made the squiggle bench, I essentially extruded from the front towards the back, adding a single piece each glue up. Shortly after that project, I realized it would save a lot of time if I started from the middle and added a piece to each side and worked my way out. This squiggle rack will be made of 9 total pieces, which means I had to do 4 glue ups. I was able to do all of these over the course of a single day. I left the glue and clamps for about 2 hours before rerouting and then moving on to the next glue up. I left the last layer in clamps overnight and finally routed the last pieces a few days later. The taller the piece got, the more careful I had to be routing. It's easy to tip the piece away from or into the bit, which leaves divots in the squiggle. These divots will be carried on to the next pieces because the flush trim bit simply follows the previous layer. I had a few of these, but was able to get them sanded out just fine. One of the more common questions I received after making the squiggle bench was why I didn't just cut all the pieces out on the CNC router and glue them together. In that case, the bench was too big to be fully cut out on my CNC, but the main reason was to try a method of construction that is approachable to a lot of woodworkers. A template can be made in a variety of ways and then used to create an extruded profile. Also, if all of the parts are cut out on the CNC, the glue up has to go perfectly or else there will be overlapping edges that can't really be cleaned up well. With these 9 pieces, the squiggle ended up being 7 inches deep. I considered adding some walnut accents to the outside, but figured the solid ash look was nice enough. I trimmed the ends at the table saw and moved to sanding. The radius of the curves was large enough to allow my sander to reach every surface. I used a foam sanding pad on my orbital sander, which prevented the sander from creating any flat spots. The pad allowed the sander to contour to the curves as needed. After raising the grain with water and sanding up to 220 grit, I added some walnut oil. I was going to add some roundovers to the faces, but decided the square edges looked good against the squiggle profile. Most of the surfaces are some percentage of end grain, which meant this thing absorbed the oil really fast. It takes a few coats to get it saturated, but the grain took on a nice gold color and was ready to hold some bottles. This was a fun little project and is a method I want to keep incorporating into my workflow. The idea of a coffee table with more subtle curves under a glass top would be pretty cool. There's a fair amount of wasted material, but that's typically the case with any curved profile or sculpted piece. If you're interested in seeing stuff like this while in progress, follow me on Instagram at parillaworks. Until next time, thanks for watching.